What if everything you call failure is actually the beginning of your greatest masterpiece? The story of Steve Jobs does not begin with technology, with Apple, or with innovation. It begins with something far quieter, far more vulnerable. A newborn placed into the arms of adoptive parents who had no idea that the child they held would one day reshape the world. There is something profoundly human about the beginning of Steve's life. The sense of not knowing where you belong, the questions that form before you even understand their shape, the feeling of being chosen, yet also feeling the weight of a world that doesn't quite fit your edges. Steve would later say that being adopted was one of the greatest gifts of his life, because it taught him early on that love isn't guaranteed by blood. It's built by commitment, by intention, by showing up when it matters. And that idea, the idea of showing up fully, would echo through everything he built. Growing up in California during the rise of Silicon Valley, Steve wasn't a child who followed instructions. He wasn't the neat student teachers praised. He was the one who challenged assumptions, questioned every rule, pushed every boundary. He saw the world through a lens that most children didn't. Not of what things were, but what they could become. His father, Paul Jobs, would show him how to sand the back of a fence even when nobody would see it, explaining that true craftsmanship is built on pride, not attention. Steve absorbed that. He learned that excellence is not about applause, it's about honoring the work itself. That lesson would shape the DNA of Apple decades later. As he grew older, Steve discovered electronics, creativity, and an almost spiritual fascination with the way humans connect to the tools they use. But there was a discomfort inside him, a sense that traditional paths weren't meant for him. When he entered Reed College, a prestigious liberal arts school, he walked into classrooms not to follow a curriculum, but to pursue curiosity. Yet even curiosity cannot calm the pressures of life. Within months, Steve dropped out, not because he wasn't smart enough, not because he lacked potential, but because he refused to spend his adoptive parents' life savings on an education he didn't believe in. It was one of the first great leaps of faith he ever took, stepping into uncertainty without any guarantee that the world would catch him. But dropping out didn't mean dropping away. He stayed on campus, sleeping on floors, returning Coke bottles for food money, and attending classes unofficially. He took a calligraphy class after stumbling into the room one afternoon. A class with no practical purpose, no obvious benefit, nothing that promised a career. Yet within those quiet lessons, he learned something about beauty, elegance, precision, and the art of creating something that feels alive. The reason the Macintosh had beautiful typography, he would say later, is that I had dropped in on that calligraphy course. Life has a way of turning meaningless moments into destiny, but only if you pay attention, only if you follow your curiosity without fear. It was in those drifting years that Steve Jobs began to refine a philosophy, that creativity is simply connecting things, that the world is not divided into the artistic and the technical, but built from the marriage of both. His mind worked in intersections, art and engineering, intuition and logic, perfection and simplicity. This was not a skill he learned. It was a way he existed. When Steve finally met Steve Wozniak, a quiet engineering genius with a heart full of invention, the world shifted. They connected instantly, one driven by vision, the other by pure technical brilliance. What they had was not a company. It was a spark. In a small garage in Los Altos, surrounded by cables, circuit boards, and the smell of soldering metal, the two Steves worked toward something they didn't yet have the words for. They weren't trying to build Apple, they were trying to build possibility. Their first product, the Apple I, was primitive compared to the sleek devices we know today. But it carried a revolutionary idea. Computers should be personal. They should live not in labs or corporations, but in homes, on desks, in the hands of individuals who could use them to create. Steve Jobs didn't invent the personal computer, but he did something far more powerful. He made people believe they were meant to use one. Apple grew fast, almost too fast. Success can be intoxicating, but it can also be destabilizing. At 25, Steve was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet his emotional maturity was still catching up to his ambition. He was passionate, demanding, intense, and often impossible to work with. His expectations did not bend. They shattered people. But beneath that intensity was a deeper truth. He believed that the world deserved excellence, and he refused to deliver anything less. By 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh, a machine that would change computing forever. It introduced the graphical user interface, the mouse, the idea that humans could communicate with technology in a natural, intuitive way. The Macintosh wasn't just a product. It was a statement. It said that technology should serve humanity, not intimidate it. But behind that brilliance was a storm brewing. Apple's leadership clashed with Steve's uncompromising vision. To them, he was unpredictable, disruptive, a visionary who was also a threat to stability. And in a decision that remains one of the most dramatic moments in business history, Steve Jobs was fired from the very company he created. Imagine that for a moment, being pushed out of your own creation, losing not just a job, but a part of your identity. For many, that would have been the end. For Steve, it was the beginning of something deeper. "I didn't see it then," he would later say, "but getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." Because in that painful loss, Steve rediscovered something he had forgotten: the hunger to build, the freedom to explore, the joy of starting with nothing again. In his exile, Steve began two major ventures. The first was Next, a company that focused on building powerful computers for universities and businesses. It was elegant, expensive, ahead of its time. The world didn't quite understand Next, but the philosophy behind it, simplicity, power, precision, would eventually become the backbone of Apple's future. The second venture was Pixar. When Steve invested in a small graphics division from Lucasfilm, he didn't know it would eventually become the most transformative animation studio in the world. Pixar's storytelling was built on heart, on universal emotion, on the very thing Steve himself understood deeply: that technology must serve humanity, not overshadow it. Toy Story became the world's first full-length computer animated film, and Pixar awakened a new era of creativity. But what makes this chapter of Steve's life remarkable is not that he founded Next or Pixar. It's that he built them during the darkest period of his career. The world had labeled him a failure. Critics mocked his downfall. Even friends doubted him. Yet he kept moving. He kept creating. He kept believing in the power of vision. This is where the lesson becomes universal. Success is not the absence of failure. Success is the refusal to let failure define the boundaries of your future. Years passed, and something unexpected happened. Apple, the company that once pushed him out, began to fall apart. Its products lacked direction, its leadership lacked clarity, innovation had slowed. And in 1997, Apple turned back to the man who once transformed it. Steve Jobs returned home. But Steve did not come back bitter. He came back focused. He came back wiser. He came back with a new philosophy: that great work is not the result of speed, but clarity. Not the result of more products, but fewer, crafted with intention. And for the first time, he spoke a line that would echo in every creative mind for decades to come. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. He didn't say it as inspiration. He said it as truth, a truth he had lived. Because the journey from being fired to returning triumphant was not powered by revenge, ego, or competition. It was powered by love, for creativity, for innovation, for the challenge of building something meaningful. When Steve simplified Apple's product line, people questioned him. When he insisted on minimalist designs, smooth interfaces, and devices that felt like extensions of human intuition, he was told it was too radical. But Steve didn't follow trends. He created them. He didn't listen to fear. He listened to vision. And then came the moment that changed everything: the introduction of a small, pocket-sized device that held 1,000 songs. The iPod wasn't just a music player. It was a revolution. It turned Apple into a cultural force, into a company that didn't just sell products, but shaped lifestyles. But Steve was far from done. In 2007, he walked onto a stage in his signature black turtleneck and introduced a device that would forever change the way humans interact with information: the iPhone. A single object that combined communication, creativity, entertainment, and connection. It wasn't just technology. It was possibility held in the palm of your hand. And it all began with a boy who was adopted, who dropped out of college, who was fired from his own company, who refused to give up. When the first iPhone was introduced, the world watched with a silent awe that very few innovations have ever inspired. It wasn't just a device. It felt like the future unfolding in front of millions of eyes at once. People didn't fully understand it at the time. They didn't grasp that this small rectangular screen would reshape culture, communication, creativity, commerce, and even human behavior itself. But Steve Jobs understood. He understood because he had spent a lifetime thinking about the intersection between technology and the human spirit. The iPhone was not just an achievement of engineering. It was an expression of Steve's belief that the tools we use should elevate our lives, simplify our chaos, and amplify our potential. But what the world didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the emotional and spiritual weight behind these innovations. For Steve, building technology was not about making products. It was about making meaning. It was about giving humanity something that allowed ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Every design choice, every pixel, every curve of the device mattered because it represented a philosophy. Simplicity was not minimalism for its own sake. It was a gateway to clarity. It was about stripping away everything unnecessary so that what mattered most could shine. He once said, "Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean." And that was exactly what he demanded from himself and his teams. A level of clarity so deep that it forced the mind to move beyond mediocrity and into mastery. As Apple transformed into one of the most influential companies in the world, Steve Jobs evolved too. His leadership became sharper yet more grounded. He learned to trust more, to communicate more deeply, and to focus not on controlling everything, but on building a culture that carried the same obsession with excellence. His past failures, especially his firing from Apple, had humbled him. It had reshaped him. It taught him that greatness isn't about being right all the time. It's about learning fast, adapting with humility, and having the courage to start over. This journey from ego-driven ambition to purpose-driven vision is one of the most important lessons of Steve Jobs' life. Because what he discovered, often painfully, is that success without purpose is hollow. Innovation without intention is noise. Work without love becomes a burden rather than a gift. That is why his words, "The only way to do great work is to love what you do," resonates so deeply. He didn't say this from a motivational stage. He said it from experience, from the trenches, from the intimate understanding that loving your work means believing in it enough to endure setbacks, to question yourself, to grow through failure, and to keep creating even when the world doubts you. But the story of Steve Jobs is not just about products or philosophy. It is also about fragility, the fragility of time, health, and human life. In 2003, Steve was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. It was a moment that would force him to confront his own mortality, not with fear, but with introspection. His battle with illness marked the beginning of a quieter, more reflective chapter in his life. And yet, even as he fought through treatments, surgeries, and declining strength, Steve continued working with an intensity that seemed almost impossible. He would step on stage with a thinner frame, a softer voice, yet behind his eyes burned the same fire. The fire to build, to create, to finish what he had started. During these years, Apple released the MacBook Air, the iPad, and major advancements across every product line. Each launch showed the world not just innovation, but resilience. Steve's deteriorating health did not diminish his commitment, it amplified it. He once said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." And that quote wasn't a philosophical line, it was a declaration of how he lived. He refused to be defined by illness. He refused to stop dreaming. He refused to let fear dictate the boundaries of his creativity. This period also revealed the depth of Steve's maturity as a human being. He spent more time with his family, more time in quiet reflection, more time exploring what it truly means to live with purpose. His sense of gratitude deepened. His appreciation for beauty, simplicity, creativity, and the fragility of existence evolved into a profound worldview that shaped his final innovations. He understood something few people ever truly internalize. Life is not measured by its length, but by the light we ignite in other people. The closer he came to the end of his journey, the more intentional he became about legacy. Not legacy in the sense of fame, wealth, or reputation, but legacy as contribution. Steve wanted to leave behind a world that was better, more connected, more creative, and more human because of the tools he built. He believed that technology, when crafted with love and precision, could empower individuals to follow their own dreams. He wanted artists to create art more easily. He wanted thinkers to explore ideas more deeply. He wanted storytellers, photographers, musicians, visionaries, entrepreneurs, everyone, to have access to tools that democratized creativity. The true essence of Steve Jobs' influence is not found in the hardware or software he delivered. It's found in the millions of people who used his creations to build new worlds, new businesses, new stories, new revolutions. As his health continued to decline, Steve stepped down as CEO of Apple. Yet even in those final moments, he never truly left the company, because Apple wasn't just a business to him. It was a living expression of his philosophy that life is too short for anything less than excellence, that beauty matters, that innovation must serve humanity, and that passion is worth everything. His final public appearance came in June 2011, months before his passing. Standing on the stage, fragile but determined, Steve presented iCloud, a vision of seamless digital connection. And as people clapped, what they didn't fully realize was that they were witnessing the closing chapter of a man who had given everything to his mission. Steve Jobs passed away on October 5th, 2011. The world mourned not just the loss of a CEO, but the loss of a visionary. Tributes flowed from every corner of the globe. People left apples outside Apple stores. Writers reflected on his legacy. Innovators thanked him for shaping their dreams. And millions of individuals, people who had never met him, felt as if they had lost someone who helped them become who they were. But perhaps the most powerful moment came from his own family. His sister, Mona Simpson, said that as Steve took his final breaths, he gazed past the shoulders of his loved ones and whispered, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." A simple phrase, yet layered with meaning. Some say it was the awe of seeing beyond this world. Others say it was the realization of a life fully lived. Whatever it was, those words capture the essence of Steve Jobs: curiosity, wonder, and the belief that something extraordinary always lies ahead. Today, Steve's legacy is not merely in the iPhone or the Mac or Pixar films or even Apple as a trillion-dollar company. His legacy lives in an attitude, a way of approaching life and work with intention, passion, and relentless commitment to excellence. He taught the world that innovation is not just about technology. It's about humanity. It's about caring deeply enough to question everything. It's about refusing to accept mediocrity. It's about honoring your unique vision even when others can't see it yet. More than anything, Steve Jobs taught us that the journey to greatness is not a straight line. It is messy, unpredictable, and often filled with loss: adoption, dropping out of college, being fired, struggling through illness. But each setback is a catalyst, each failure a teacher, each loss a doorway into deeper purpose. Steve turned obstacles into stepping stones, pain into creativity, uncertainty into possibility. And the message he left behind is timeless. Do what you love, or at least move toward it. Protect your curiosity, follow your intuition, trust that the dots will connect, and never settle. Because the world changes when one person refuses to accept its limits. As the camera fades to black in the final moments of this cinematic story, the viewer does not walk away thinking about a billionaire or a CEO. They walk away thinking about themselves, about their dreams, their possibilities, their courage, because Steve Jobs' greatest gift was not the products he built. It was the belief that every person watching this video, right now, has the power to build something of their own. And when you take a single step forward, no matter how small, your story begins to change. Because just like Steve, your life's most extraordinary chapters may be waiting on the other side of a moment that feels like an ending. This is the legacy of Steve Jobs. Not perfection, but passion. Not certainty, but belief. Not luck, but relentless, purposeful creation. And this is the lesson he leaves for every dreamer. The greatness is not found in what you have, but in how deeply you commit to who you are meant to become.